toothless shark and some sparkly seashells have to do with our money system? Well, that is what I am here to share with you today. You see, most people are a bit perplexed when we start talking about our monetary system with words like derivatives and credit default swaps and quantitative easing, for goodness sakes. Whew. For some, you know, it makes our heads spin. But for something that impacts almost every aspect of all of our lives, it's pretty important for us to understand, and it shouldn't be that complex. In fact, it's not. It's as simple as the story of the loan shark and the sparkly seashells. Once upon a time, there lived 10 Goombas on an isolated tropical island. The Goombas worked together to create a nice life for themselves. They traded with one another, offering something to the group from their own skill area. Everyone's needs were met. The island was abundant with fresh water and food that was ever growing. The Goombas had plenty of leisure time for playing, dancing, and making music. One day, a very large sea creature landed on its shores. The sea creature introduced itself as the loan shark. The loan shark swam alone because he was an outcast among the other sharks because he didn't have any teeth. So instead of teeth, he put some sparkly seashells in his mouth to substitute. The loan shark noticed the Goombas admiring the sparkly seashells in his mouth. Ah, I see you like my shells. These are the finest sparklies from the depths of the sea. I'll tell you what, if you'll assist me in getting back into the water, I'll fetch you some sparkly seashells for yourselves. The Goombas eagerly agreed, and they worked together to push the loan shark back out into the sea. The next day, the loan shark arrived and, just as promised, had sparkly seashells for all. Now, here's the thing, said the loan shark. I'll offer up to 10 seashells to anyone who wants them. You can use them to trade with one another for things that you might like. Since there will only be a set number of them, it will create a standard for trade on this island. In return, all I ask is that you return the seashells to me at the end of the year and provide me with one extra seashell in exchange for the services that I provide. All of the 10 Goombas were excited to get their hands on the sparkly seashells. They thought the interest of only one extra seashell would be quite fair. And with all of the trading that they would be able to do with their seashells, it shouldn't be hard to earn one extra shell to pay for the cost of using them. So they each borrowed up to their 10 seashell limit. And so began the sparkly seashell currency system on the island of the Goombas. By the end of the year, though, some were finding it hard to come up with that extra seashell to pay back to the loan shark. This was obviously due to the fact that there were not enough seashells to pay back the 110 that were owed in total, because there were only 100 that were given to the Goombas. Okay, but the loan shark was very smart and very generous. At the end of the year, he greeted the weary Goombas with an offer that they couldn't refuse. Have no fear, I will offer you each a new loan of 11 seashells. With that, you will have enough to pay for last year's loan. The only thing I ask is that at the end of the year, you pay me back the 11 sparkly seashells with one extra to cover my expenses. The Goombas were relieved and thankful for the loan shark, that he was so merciful. Each was determined that this year they would work even harder to ensure they were able to make enough to repay the loan shark. They worked more hours, offered more services to one another, and produced more things from the natural resources on the island. Keep in mind, though the Goombas now owe a total of 110 shells, they really only have 100 shells on the island because the extra 10 has already been given to the shark to pay for last year's interest. Okay, before they knew it, the end of the year had rolled around again, and as you can guess, they did not have 12 seashells apiece to repay the loan shark. But the loan shark was very smart and very generous, as you can. So he greeted the weary Goombas with an offer that they could not refuse. I will offer you each 12 sparkly seashells. With that, you will have enough to repay me for last year's debt. The only thing that I ask is that at the end of the year, you repay me the 12 sparkly seashells plus one more. The Goombas all accepted, not really having any choice at this point, for where else were they going to get enough sparkly seashells to be able to pay back what they owed? By now, they no longer had time for playing games, dancing, or making music. All were busily hustling to earn those seashells. The resources on the island were also being exhausted, and the Goombas used more and more of them to produce items to sell to one another. Before they knew it, the end of the year had rolled around again. And though each had worked so much harder this year, they still found they were not able to come up with the full amount. Well, you can guess what the loan shark did, yes? He offered them a new loan, and on it went. Year after year, the Goombas worked harder and harder. They found less and less time for leisure and connection with one another, and they soon became fatigued, irritable, and depressed. And they also began depleting their island's once abundant resources. Then they had a real problem of scarcity on their hands. Does this story sound familiar to any of you? Now, keep in mind, this story is an overly simplistic illustration of how money is created in our monetary system through the issuance of debt. But it should give us an accurate picture of why we cannot win at this particular game, because there is always a shortage and an ever-growing sense of indebtedness and not enough. So, how did this story end? The one about the loan shark and the sparkly seashells, you may want to know. Well, I've heard different endings to this story. You know, some say that eventually the loan shark forced those Goombas into some form of repayment, whether it was through their labor or use of their island and its resources. But I like to think that one day those Goombas woke up, realized they were bamboozled, and they told that loan shark to go bite himself. And then they went back to trading with one another in a true free trade fashion and lived happily ever after in harmony with their island's abundant natural systems.